All right, starting the stream now. Just waiting to see if everything levels out here as far as smoothness with the whole connection here. But today we're going to be talking about the OTA. I wanted to do it on a live format. It's going to turn into a video after this anyway. Live just works out a little bit better for what I'm doing. So here we go. We're going to talk about the OTA here today, the fresh new OTA. It's interesting to look at, for sure. We got some buffs, we got some nerfs. I'm going to go ahead and switch the scene here. I'll go to my gameplay scene here. It ends up being a little bit better, I think. All right, so we're looking at the OTA here today. Like I said, February 27th, 2025. Let's go ahead and see. Let's see. There's a total of 9 cards being changed, and obviously here is the list. Here we have Surtur, Scar, Arrow, Werewolf by Night, Annihilus, White Queen, Lizard, High Evo, and Joaquin Torres, all receiving nerfs and/or buffs, or I guess I should say nerfs or buffs. Some of the cards have some text changes as well that are not listed, so I'll go ahead and get into that currently. Here we go, February 27th. It reads, in this week's balance update, we'll be continuing to adjust metagame imbalances, particularly among cards and Surtur strategies that continue to be problematic over time. Additionally, we have a swath of cards that we've been looking to buff and improve the pattern of. Some of those are at the perfect time with the series drop. Others are old starter deck favorites that we're looking to give some love with prehistoric heroes. And finally, we have a recent release that's simply performing worse than we would like. Let's go ahead and discuss the Surtur deck and some of its important or supporting pieces. So Surtur, I think I kind of saw this one coming. No matter what they do to this thing, it's just always relevant in the meta. There's always people using it. Reasonably so. It is a very, very good card. Even with them changing it, just in the last OTA, I think it was, they had just changed it, and they changed it again. The last change they made was this change right here, where it only activates twice per game. I don't know if you guys can see that. I can zoom in a little bit here, but twice per game was the activation or the change that they made. So, which was interesting. It still got to a 311, which was totally fine. At least with me when I ran my starter list here. But let's get to the change here. So obviously you have the old one where it only activates twice per game and gets +3 power. The new one, after you play a card with 10 or more power, this gains +2 power. So they got rid of the limitation as far as, of it activating twice per game. However, they did knock down the power that it gets each time you play a 10 card. So +2 power, I think, is still going to be a strong competitor. It's still going to be relevant, I would say. Get these ads out of here. It's still going to be relevant for sure, at least in my opinion. I guess we'll have to see how it plays out. But I think this is a fine change for a card that is, I want to say, oversaturated right now in the meta. There's a lot of people that seem to be using it. Obviously, it's not as present in the Sanctum Showdown, which if you guys haven't seen my video on the Sanctum Showdown experience, I had a little fun time making that one. Go ahead and check that one out. But they say that Surtur has simply been too efficient for his cost, as well as enabling a synergy with Scar, too powerful for most decks to compete with even with after adjustments. So I tend to agree with that. I am a Surtur fan, particularly, but I do think this change is fine and it's needed because Surtur is hard to compete with. So I think this is fine. It gets the job done. I'm not going to go ahead and read everything. That's a little too much, but just kind of their thoughts there. So anyway, Surtur stays a 3, or he's going back to a 3-5. I think it was a 3-4 before, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was a 3-4 before the time before that. Actually, I'm thinking of the time before that. So it's 3-5. It gains +2 power for each 10 power card you play. Down to the Scar nerf, which is interesting because what they did to it was they simply just changed it to a 7-12, which I guess they add another 7 power card to the game along with Airshim, which is interesting if you're going to try to play something with Cersei or something like that. But this is simply just to, I don't. Obviously, they want to decrease what they're doing as far as Surtur decks go, decrease the power that those decks have. However, I think changing it to a 7/12 doesn't do a whole lot. I think, Surtur decks routinely get Scar down to, 0 pretty easily. And the only thing that's going to do is make him 1 cost instead of 0 cost. Which, obviously, it has its niche cases where it's going to affect things. Like, you're not going to be able to play like a 6-drop along with Scar anymore. Unless you have 7 energy, of course. It's going to be, the 6-drop alone, or it's just going to be Scar amongst other things, other cheaper things, I should say. They said that we know this change might be disappointing with Scar's presence in the series drop, but it is our responsibility to be committed to the health of the gameplay experience at large. They just are talking about the numbers here. The reality is that the numbers of various Surtur/Scar decks have been too high for quite a while now, and it has become apparent that incremental change isn't doing enough to right the imbalance in a reasonable time frame to maximize the enjoyment of our players. Regardless of Surtur being drawn, it is still quite achievable to deploy 20 power on turn 6 with Scar in its current form. We're hoping that ultimately this will release some pressure on the metagame and encourage more diversity. We'll continue to consider other options for these packages of cards as the metagame becomes less Surtur-centric. Yeah, again, I think this change is fine. It doesn't really change a whole lot. Like I said, really the only thing that's going to change is, for example, like on turn 6, you're not going to be able to play a 6-drop and Scar. Or, you're not going to be able to... It's going to cost 3 instead of 2. It's also going to cost 5 instead of 4 for the 10, for the amount of 10 power cards that you have down. So it's a fine change. I don't hate it. It's fine. I think it'll end up being okay in the long run. And it's not like they're just increasing the cost. They're giving it cost and power. They're giving it 2 power on top of that. So I think it's fine. I think the change is fine. Moving on to Arrow. Arrow has been an interesting card because when it was a 5, I think it was a 5/10 originally, at least when I started playing the game, and they knocked it down to a 9, which effectively rendered the card unplayable. Not unplayable, but it just dropped off just because people didn't see the need to play it. I just think that 1 power point just makes a difference, and they're doing the same thing again here. They're just reverting it back to 5/9. So the ability stays the same, of course. They're just changing it from a 5/10 to a 5/9. This is obviously really only to decrease, Surtur decks and their effectiveness. That's the direct shot. The only bright side about this is that it's not Chi-able anymore. You can't use Shang-Chi on it, which is fine. But you are also not going to get any Scar synergy with this one. So it's going to disappear from Scar decks pretty quickly. And the only thing you're going to see Arrow in anymore typically is probably some sort of move package with Scream. That's the only way I could see this card being used now. So nothing really to this change, just 5/10 to a 5/9. So I'm not going to get too crazy into the text of what they're saying here. So moving on. Werewolf by Night. It is part of the series drop, so it is nice that they're giving it a little bit of a, as you'll see here in a second, a little bit of a buff. It's cool. Obviously, it's just +2 power for any on-reel card, and it moves there. They're just changing it from a 3/2 to a 3/3, which is good, giving it a power point, especially that it's in the series drop. It makes it more of an incentive or more of a consolation prize when you get it in the if you get it on the token shop or on the spotlight catches or whatnot. So 3/2 to a 3/3, nothing really too much there. They just said that Werewolf by Night used to be a mainstay alongside Bounce and Loki, and despite it being buffed the last time we talked about it, it still hasn't picked up much in popularity. We're hoping this will do some good work to give it a home again. Yeah, I think it'll do fine. I don't think it's going to go crazy pop off in the meta, but it will be much more prevalent in Bounce decks now. Because I noticed in Bounce decks typically don't really run Werewolf by Night anymore. A lot of it is just a lot of Bounce decks just don't really use Werewolf by Night anymore. So maybe this will give it a little push that it needs and allow it to be used in those decks now. So Next change is Annihilus, who is also in the series drops. Then these next few changes are all cards that were in the series drops, I believe. Annihilus is pretty simple again. He's just getting a power point. He's going from a 5.6 to a 5.7 here. So I think that was originally what he was when he came out, if I'm not mistaken. He was a 5.7, and the only difference was that his text was it allowed you to send over 0 cost cards as well, and not just cards under 0, which I won't lie, made the meta kind of miserable. Everything was just, junk all over the place. And the only way to counter it was to also play Annihilus and send the junk back over as long as you have priority. So while I do kind of miss, Annihilus being a card that sends over, negative or 0 cost cards as well, I think it's important for the health of the game that Annihilus stays at, just cards below 0. So those are my thoughts on that. Annihilus is fine, 5.7, getting an extra power point. Always good when a series drop card gets a buff. I'm not going to read that one for right now. White Queen, this is interesting. White Queen has been a forgotten card, much forgotten card in Marvel Snap. She's a Series 1 card. You get her kind of on the outset of the game, and no one uses her. This is just it's just a trash can in the form of a card. The only way people will play her is if they play her ironically, or you get her from Arshim or something like that. So what they're doing to her is they're keeping the text and they're just changing her from a 4.6 to a 3.4, which I think will definitely make her more playable. Because I think when you get to your turn 4, playing a White Queen just feels kind of bad. To me, at least. I don't know. Maybe not to you guys, but to me, playing a White Queen on 4 feels bad. So I guess playing her on 3 is fine, and 3.4 stat line isn't bad. So I think she'll definitely get more play at a 3.4, especially with card generation decks, with Victoria Hand and Agent Coulson. Jeez. Agent Coulson in that sort of strategy. What they say though is in response, or I guess in correlation to Isan. With the upcoming release of Isan and Starbrand and Prehistoric Heroes, we thought this was a good opportunity to give some love to some old fan favorites. White Queen has been weak for some time, but we always have an eye on how early series changes can impact the new player experience. Regardless, we think this is a good time to introduce a buff and hope that this will delight fans of hers as well as produce another exciting hook for Isan. And remember, Isan reads, after each turn, put a card from your hand that didn't start in... Gosh, I am just all over the place. After each turn, put a card from your hand that didn't start in your deck here. So that's fun. I mean, you get to play, essentially, if you have Isan, you have to have him down. Or do you not have to have him down? I'm a little confused on how that works, because if he's a 6/9, you're not going to be able to get him down till 6. So I'm assuming maybe he'll work like Airshim, where it'll just happen and you don't have to have him down. Which will be interesting, I think. Obviously, it synergizes quite well with White Queen, so that'll be an interesting change. We'll have to see how Isan performs and how he plays. How his text ends up reading. Because if it's like Airshim, where you don't have to play him and it just happens, I could see Isan being a good card with White Queen and all those card generation decks. That'll be really interesting. But if you have to actually put Isan down, then that'll change things. But I don't see why they would do that if they're talking about White Queen being involved with Isan decks. I don't think you're going to have Isan down for his ability to work. So interesting stuff going on. We're going to go ahead and go to Lizard really quick. Let's see, Lizard. All they're doing here is just giving him a PowerPoint. Going from a 2.5 to a 2.6. So I think that's totally fine. It's going to increase his play rate for sure. I just don't know how much. I think he's already played pretty often, I would say. I guess would be the right finding there. But he's played pretty often. I think he's going to do just fine with that PowerPoint. He's going to get even more play, especially with Starbrand coming out. Starbrand coming out is going to be an interesting interesting combination with Lizard, simply because he's going to fit in Sauron decks. Sauron decks are going to be everywhere, and it's going to be fun to play with those. I'm excited for that. Starbrand's going to be a cool card, and I'm excited to play some Sauron. So, High Evolutionary is also getting a little bit of a buff, just going from a 4/6 to a 4/7. I think this is fine. It doesn't do a crazy ton. Just giving these cards some extra power points just to kind of make them more competitive in the decks that they're used in. So, interesting stuff. Nothing really to talk about there. Everyone knows what High Evo does. I'm not going to get into what he does and where he fits, but 4/6 to a 4/7, solid. Joaquin Torres Falcon. This is interesting because everyone was kind of complaining when he came out that he just kind of feels like, a Wong, essentially. He's just a Wong you play a turn earlier, which in a sense kind of makes him not so good, because you can literally just cheat out Wong with, something like a Zabu or a Psylocke. Although in the decks that you're running Joaquin Torres in, you're not going to be really running a Psylocke or a Zabu, for example. At least in my opinion. I could be wrong about that, but what they're doing with Joaquin Torres is they're simply just taking him from a 3/4 to a 2/2. So I think this is better. You'll be able to get him out a lot earlier and take advantage of his ability much sooner, which is going to be much more, I think, good for the card. Much more. I think his play rate, his use rate is going to go way up with this, especially in bounce, especially with the Werewolf by Night buff as well. Werewolf by Night and Joaquin Torres are going to be nice fits in the bounce lists. So he might be everywhere. So we'll see how this goes. Make sure to bring in your rogues or your enchantresses, and yeah, that's all I gotta say about that. They're making some text changes here, some what they call localization changes. With Eliath, they're just simply switching his text to say enemy characters. Remove the text from all unrevealed enemy characters. And they're doing the same thing with Gwenpool as well. Pick a random character in your hand 3 times, give a +2 power. So the reason they're saying this is here. Savvy folks might notice some small changes in the language for these cards in this OTA. These adjustments create no functional changes currently, but with the upcoming prehistoric hero season, skills will be introduced to the game. These are cards where functionality will be slightly affected by the introduction of that new card type. Stay tuned for a patch notes on March 4th for more details. So I think the simple thing here is that with skills, there's going to be skill cards, so to speak, in your hand, and Eliath and Gwenpool are not going to be able to hit those. So Gwenpool will target character cards that are currently in the game right now, but those skill cards, she's not going to be able to target, and same thing with Eliath. Eliath will not be able to hit those skill cards if you play them on the board. Their abilities, whatever they are, whatever they will be, will still happen. But the character cards, those will still be affected just the same. So interesting. We'll have to see how the prehistoric season unfolds and what the skill cards they're talking about, what they have, or what kind of effect that they have on Eliath and Gwenpool and just the meta in general. So interesting stuff. Like I said, that's it for the OTA. I think this is a pretty cool one. Obviously, Surtur gets quite a big nerf, and OTAs, or not OTA, the series drop cards get quite a nice buff. So I think this is good. Some old favorites get some love. This is fine. I think this OTA is serviceable and gets the job done for this current meta. So that's about all I have to say on it. Just kind of wanted to cover it, give my initial thoughts on it. Don't want this to be too long of a video. So hope you guys enjoyed this little OTA live kind of reaction / thoughts going on here. But yeah, that being said, let me know your thoughts on the OTA, and I'll catch you in the next one.